Okay, hello, how's it going? I do apologize for the change of program today. I had to do this because, as it happens, I no longer have fiber. So trying to do my combat tutorials is really not practical, and as a result I have changed or shifted some of the programming that I had planned to do to today. Basically it was either this, I just had to do it. It's either this or I do nothing. So I decided to do this instead. Okay, so please don't freak out by the title, The Development of Dungeons & Dragons 6E or 6th edition. I don't want you to freak out and think there's a new version of the game coming out very shortly. That's not the case. Okay, all right. So if you're rewatching this video, you will find that there is a start time down in the description. I will open it up to people who want to discuss anything near the end. What I'm really doing is talking about my view of what is going to be happening with the new version of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm on VDSL, so you might find you have a few technical problems staying in the room. Okay? So this is a discussion I will explain very quickly, but basically feel free to chat with me near the end of the presentation and we'll see how we go, okay? All right, so let's get started. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm talking about not necessarily Dungeons & Dragons 5e, I'm talking about the development of Dungeons & Dragons 6e, or the 6th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, all of which is speculation. So do not freak out and do not get upset in the chat or in the comment section, okay? This is all speculation. This is what I have been seeing taking place. I know that Nerdarchy did a video on the topic as well. I've been planning to do this for a while. So I wanted to talk about the topic and explain to you what I think is likely to happen, and I want you to understand that what's going to happen is not as bad as you might think. So don't freak out. So when I say the development of Dungeons & Dragons 6e, actually what I'm talking about is potentially the development of Dungeons & Dragons 5.5. Now, for those of you who played the 3rd version of Dungeons & Dragons, you will know that there was enough changes made to that version of the game that eventually they had no choice but to actually release a new version of the rule set, and it became Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Now, we are not there yet. I would say we are a few more years away before that possibility might crop up. But for me, I would imagine that if the design team do get to that point earlier or later, which is entirely possible, that what's going to take place is we will see not a complete overhaul of the game, but a meshing of the game and a removal and addition of some of the things that worked and didn't work for that game. And there's quite a few different reasons why a new version of Dungeons & Dragons is very likely. It's definitely in development. They always are. How far along, I don't even think the design team knows. What I think is taking place is, as all of you know, there's been a sudden surge in Dungeons & Dragons, and it has been spawned by the community at large. It has been spawned by the, I have to say it, the popularity and success of Critical Role. It has been spawned by not only bringing back a lot of people who were playing Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons 4e and older versions of the game who are now coming back to this game later on in their life. It's because the community is actually making those changes take place. It's not because Wizards of the Coast or anybody else is making these shifts. Often when a game system changes, it's not completely a result of the design team or the company. It's a shifting of the way that your community is thinking and operating. So, as I said, Why are these changes going to be taking place? It's because of live streaming. It's because people are making adjustments to Dungeons & Dragons 5e, making it more complex, keeping it the same, and stripping back stuff. And this is why I think Dungeons & Dragons 6e is certainly in development, but probably not complete, and really not likely to be. There will be no deciding factor or date where it would be released. And it's going to be developed and shifting and taking a lot of ideas from different game systems. For those of you who are really fond of Numenera, I would imagine that anything from Numenera that they can use and they will incorporate into the game. There's always a fear of another D&D game system. This is a normal process. So there's always that fear that what is something that you have got used to or you're just getting into will be replaced by something new that requires you to buy more books. But as they have proved before, the design team has released the core rules for free. Maybe not all of the player character options, but they have released all of the stuff for free. So you can play with the core rules and quite a lot of the character options. Now, when it comes to any kind of development, I would say it is probably still a few years away. I speculate that they're probably going to have to look at some sort of adjustment, probably in about 2 years when they start pumping out their Dungeons & Dragons movie. I've talked about this before in other videos. I don't think that Dungeons & Dragons 6e will be a huge variation from what you're used to playing in terms of Dungeons & Dragons 5e with regard to the core rules. What I think it's likely to look more like is a slight adjustment to 5e with a more stripped down engine. Now, I know a lot of people are starting to say, well, hang on, I don't want a dumbed down game or a stripped down version. But there are bonuses and benefits to this because a stripped down engine or game system allows you to add a lot of optional add-ons. And I think that's really what we're going to look at. Things like Dungeon World, Fate core rules, they're all very, very sort of simple systems, but you can strap and attach more onto it if you need to. And that is what I think Dungeons & Dragons 5e will look like. Dungeons & Dragons 5e is backward compatible. I have had experience running older adventures with the new game system, Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so I see that any new version of the game is going to be backward compatible. So if you have older books, you will be able to use them with the new version of the game. That's what I would expect them to do. I think that's highly likely. Not only that, I would expect that if you are still playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e when 6e is released, you will still be able to run your adventures with some of the new content that is released with regard to story and adventures. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but right now, the adventures as they're written, unless you're looking at monster stat blocks, you could interpose any of the older versions of Dungeons & Dragons into them pretty easily. Just looking at things like ability and skill checks, whenever they talk about a skill check, there's always an ability lined up and identified with that skill. And that is done deliberately. And I think the same thing is going to take place with Dungeons & Dragons 6e. So backward compatible, and certainly backward compatible with newer adventures and the older games as well. I'm expecting to see a version of Dungeons & Dragons that looks a lot like basic D&D. It's funny how we go through cycles with any kind of development. You know, sometimes people think of development as a line that moves upward, increasing over time. But actually, development is sometimes a cycle that goes around in a circle. And I would expect that largely we are going to see something that looks in the same spirit of basic Dungeons & Dragons, with, as I said, a lot of add-ons and other stuff that you can utilize. Expect a very strong narrative rule system. It's really clear right now from what's going on within the community that people love the narrative side of Dungeons and Dragons more than they do the board game, the tactical side of things. That's why so many people are jumping on and watching other people play the game. It's not because they want to see them rolling dice and moving miniatures around and deciding about where they should position themselves. I mean, that's all good and fun, but it's the narrative. The narrative aspect of the game is what seems to be pulling it together, and it's also being done online, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's competing with video games, but it's moved into a different technology that it didn't have before, and as a result, only good things can come from this. It will be designed for a wide population. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5e was designed for a wide population, and Dungeons & Dragons 6e will be designed for a wide population. I would expect, because people are already doing it, people are already stripping down the game of 5e, they're already adding vast quantities of house rules and expanding and making the game more complex, and they're also playing it as it is. So it's going to be designed for streamers on the internet. It's going to be designed for younger children. There are parents out there who have spent quite a bit of time taking Dungeons & Dragons 5e, they're running with that engine and they're stripping it back and playing with their kids because they don't want to wait until they're 12 years old before they play the game. So they are stripping it back for their kids. And I would imagine that our design team at Wizards of the Coast knows this and knows that at some point, instead of leaving people up to that, they will produce a product that does that for them without having to go through all of that work. It's going to be designed for your average player. And those of you who are fans of 5e will probably find that Dungeons & Dragons 6e, the next version, is going to be very, very similar in feel and spirit, but with maybe a bit of tinkering. Certainly the aspects of the game that have confused people the most and resulted in a whole lot of YouTube channels making videos about rules so that people know how to play the game, or don't have to spend hours and hours trawling the internet trying to figure out how things work. So no doubt there is going to be some streamlining, but they're going to keep the spirit of it. That's my opinion anyway. What will the new Dungeons & Dragons lose or change or alter? So things like 13 Age, the Call of Cthulhu, the Seventh Sea, GURPS, No Thank You Evil, all of these have very strong sort of narrative aspects and different focuses. So, but there are some elements to Dungeons & Dragons 5e which I think they will lose, and these are the reasons why. One, the bonus action. Because when you say bonus action to somebody, they just get confused and think that you're talking about the normal action, and therefore I think that wording and phrase and terminology is going to be ditched when we see the new game developed in its full entirety. So bonus actions, I would expect them to be ditched and replaced either by something else or those sorts of features tied directly to the action itself rather than being separated in some way. And that's certainly what I think is likely to happen. Something that you might have noticed too with Dungeons & Dragons 5e is saving throws. Saving throws can take place at different times during a turn or a round, which is hugely confusing to people, and as a result, because of this, you will find that people aren't sure, am I supposed to make the saving throw at the beginning of my turn, on somebody else's turn, during the middle of my turn, when the spell effect comes into play, or the effect comes into play, or at the end of my turn. So I expect that saving throws will either get ditched completely, or the timing for when you actually have to make that saving throw will be specified at one point for everything to reduce the amount of complexity and confusion. That doesn't mean there won't be options to add in complexity, because as I said, I believe they definitely will allow for that. Cover rules as part of the core rules. I think that cover rules will probably wind up being a variant rule, an optional rule that you utilize, because it's very hard to use cover rules when you're live streaming. It's very hard for kids to understand cover rules. A lot of people often just ignore it, the concept of shooting past somebody else and using them, them being cover. A lot of people, a lot of tables just completely ignore that aspect of the game, and so cover rules don't really get used unless you're dealing with total cover or they're out in the open. Something like the opportunity attack, okay, or attacks of opportunity. Linked to the core rules, I believe that opportunity attacks will be dissected as an aspect of the game, if it even survives in its current form, as a variant rule rather than being part of the very basic core rules of any kind of Dungeons & Dragons 6e. Much more modular. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5e was promised to be a very modular game where you got a basic rule system and then you could tack bits on, which you can do, but it never really lived up to the hype and what people thought it would be. A lot of people wanted it simpler, like myself. A lot of people were happy with how it was, and that's why there's so many people playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And then a lot of people were upset that they took away a few things that were there, and they wanted those things back. And so that's why there's so many house rules and tables. There is probably no single group that's playing the game exactly as is in the book from the player's handbook. Everybody's doing everything differently. One of the things that has already been cleaned up, and that is something like the rules for resting. Clearing up and cleaning up the wording and the way that the short rest and the long rest works. There's already been alterations to how the long rest is described. And this was actually spurred on by the Dungeons & Dragons community itself. It wasn't because the design team thought, well, actually we should make major alterations to that. No, it was because they had to contend with so much flack that was adjusted. Even something like the elf trance, which created huge amounts of confusion. And so they have modified that. So I see something like resting rules being far more clear and simple to understand to avoid that confusion taking place. Codifying the rules. Now, a lot of the benefit and desire to play Dungeons & Dragons is the opportunity to do whatever you want, anything that you might desire. And the more codifying and the more rules that you have that spell out how something must be done, the more difficult it is for you to do something. If you were to take all of the feats out of Dungeons & Dragons 5e, then suddenly they're not there. Then you have a lot more options as a player. Whether you believe it or not, now you can ask your Dungeon Master, can my player try to grapple this individual? Well, now you can, because you don't have to have the grappler feat, because it's not part of your game. So that's what I mean by codifying. Taking the codifying rules out of the game will actually make it possible to be more open to more options than before. And that means they'll get moved to variant rules, optional rules that you can tack in if you want to make your game more codified and more complicated, should you desire that sort of thing. Stealing and borrowing mechanics from different roleplay games. So, and including something like Rifts in particular, certainly stealing some of their rule systems, including some of the aspects of Magic the Gathering, which is already taking place with Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So I would expect to see, now I wouldn't say in terms of mechanics and using cards, I'm talking about lore. I believe that they certainly intend to include more lore from Magic the Gathering, and that will take place in the new version of the game as well. And that will change the narrative of the game, the way that we view. You don't have to play it a particular way. These are just options available to you. Conditions, optional, and more narrative. So we already have quite a list of conditions. I don't think anybody ever remembers all of the aspects of something like the conditions for incapacitated or restrained or grappled, prone, all that sort of stuff. We often find ourselves looking those things up to make sure we know what's actually taking place. So I can see conditions either being optional or becoming more narrative in nature, with less focus on this is how it works on a grid, at the table, in combat, stuff like that, where there's dice rolling involved. What are we going to see in the new core rules of Dungeons and Dragons? So new core rules with a stronger focus on a couple of different things. I think these are probably the most likely aspects that you can expect. One is the core rules won't really be the core rules. What you'll get is 3 versions of the rules. You'll get what is basically the basic game, the standard game, the basic game, which would be narrative, with basically most things being determined by a 20-sided dice roll, and that's really about it, not much else. Then you'll have the standard game, which will be much like what you're already playing with Dungeons and Dragons 5e, but a little bit more streamlined, with some of the problems that they created for themselves being either better and clearly explained or removed completely. And then you'll get the last part of the rule system, which will be the complex part of the rule system, with lots of optional variant rules that you can plug and play into the standard version of the game and even into the basic version of the game. The basic version of the game is going to be designed for streaming online for kids, people who have a lot of difficulty with complexity. The standard game will be for those people who are quite happy to have the same relative complexity that they have now. And those people who really want to up the ante will play the game with their own house rules, and it won't look like anything else that anybody else is ever used to. With regard to new character creation structures, I would expect new character creation structures to look very similar in nature to the core rules or the basic rules of the game, such as a basic version, a standard version, and a complex version. So the basic system would have character options where instead of having to remember a certain rule for a particular ability, everything will be baked into the numerical character itself, so you don't have to remember how a particular feature works. It'll be baked into the mechanics of the game, so it's easy and quick to understand. The standard character creation will follow a similar structure to 5e structure, and then the complex one will have layers of mechanical choice. And I would say things like the feats would fall into the complex version, things like I wouldn't say they're going to bring back prestige classes, but my feeling is that they will allow for variant aspects of that. We've already seen things like boons talked about for characters. I would expect that there's going to be other aspects that are pulled into that through downtime. Renowned has been discussed. They might call it something else completely different when they finally release it. So that is what I think is going to happen with the game for Dungeons and Dragons 6e. And I honestly think that the way things are going, because I've been keeping an eye on the errata, the sage advice, and how things are developing, and what might happen for Dungeons and Dragons 5e is what happened for 3e, and that is they have no choice but eventually to release something else to compensate for all the adjustments they've had to make over the years. It really didn't take very long for the third version of Dungeons and Dragons to require 3.5. It was only about 3 or 4 years, and then they had to update. So I would imagine that might take place for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. If I have a look at my player's handbook for 5e, it's actually starting to look very different to the other players at my table who have first printings of the player's handbook. Those of them that are surviving, that is. So people are likely to see a very stripped down version of the game with aspects that can be built onto it. The design team continues to change 5e, as I said, and they've said that from the get-go, that the game changes and modifies. It's a living structure in itself. And some groups have already started this process. Whether Wizards of the Coast does anything with the game, people are already doing this right now. So it is no-brainer to think that it's going to happen eventually. I still feel it's likely to be about 2 years away before we see the rumblings of, guess what, we are going to make some changes and you're going to see a new version of the game. And that's really all I wanted to discuss. So if you found this useful, entertaining, maybe it was just time to kill, please like and share the video. If you like this sort of thing, I don't often do video content like this, but if you want to keep watching my stuff, then subscribe to my channel, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. If you want to support me, you supported me by sitting through this video, and I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. I don't do Patreon, but down in the description you will find affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon where you can buy stuff online, and that supports me so I keep doing stuff on the channel and not just about speculation videos. I do all sorts of different things, but that's really helpful. I get a small commission, you pay exactly the same price, and you just go through the link. Now, this is your opportunity. Stay in the chat box. Let me know. I know there's about 10 people there, so let me know what you think. You don't need to tell me whether you're excited about seeing a new version of the game, because nobody is. I'm not. But do you think that Dungeons & Dragons 5e is starting to morph enough that they might need to do something at some point to update it? Let me know. What are the things you are unhappy about with 5e that might hopefully be transferred into 6e when that takes place? So that's what you're going to do in the live chat, hopefully. And I see a few people have already started to comment. Otherwise, if you're not part of the live stream, down in the comments section, put your feedback down there. Please don't throw your hate at me. I'm not trying to give you a hard time or make you panic or anything. Please don't panic. Just speculation, okay? All right. So until next time, keep rolling those 20s. Just give me a second, guys. I've almost lost my voice. I need a drink of water. Okay, I'm going to have to apologize now because I can't bring the camera up on my face. If I do that, I will definitely lose the live stream. I'm now on VDSL rather than fiber, and I don't know how long that's going to be for. It could be for a short period of time. It could be for a long period of time. I still want to keep producing content for you, and I really want to get back to, honestly, I really want to get back to doing the combat tutorials and giving you videos where you get to see me and chat with me and sort of see the process of playing the game. That is definitely going to happen. I just needed to do this, get it out of my system, and it was easy to do, and hopefully there won't be too many technical problems with sound and video. Lolly Raptor, hi there, man. How's it going? Zinders Roofairy. Roofairy? Zinders Roofairy. How's it going? This is a ton of speculation. Absolutely, Zinders. It is a ton of speculation. Mike Mule said in a tweet back in June that they were nowhere near developing 6th edition. They still have years of content planned for 5e. You are absolutely right. Zinders, you are absolutely right. But see, this is the thing. When they developed the 3rd version of Dungeons & Dragons, they were not planning to do 3.5. What happened is the game system itself expanded and morphed out of their control to a point where they had no choice but to update it. And as a result, we wound up going from version 3 to 3.5. And I really think that Dungeons & Dragons 5e is going to wind up going through the same process. Because you know what's happening is the design team are really good. They are listening to what people have to say about the game. They are making changes where they think that things need to be changed, which is why you get constant updates on Sage Advice, Errata, why they are readily available on Twitter, why they keep giving you content on YouTube and Twitch TV. So they're responsive. Now, when you're responsive like this, things develop and move a lot more quickly. That's why I'm talking about this. And you are right, they still have years of 5e content planned. And probably waiting to be play tested as well. But shifting it to 6e wouldn't really be that difficult. I honestly don't think it would. Lollyraptor, with the development of D&D Beyond and the streaming implementation stuff, I think they will want to support 5e for quite a while. Yes, I do. Which is why when I say Dungeons & Dragons 6e, I honestly think that when I talk about the rule system for Dungeons & Dragons 6e, it's probably going to more be equated to being 5.5. But if you're going to do a 5.5, no doubt what they will do is try to do all the things that they wanted to do in the first place, which was have to have a game system that appealed to people who liked complexity, people who wanted it down the middle, and those people who want it nice, streamlined, and nice and simple. That's just my view. Yes, Renee, you're right. The guys from Nerdarchy mentioned the same, but also that they are discussing it, and it would be backward compatible with 5e is allegedly very important to them. Yes, I believe you'll look at video games. A lot of games now are backward compatible. You buy a new game machine and you can play the older games on the new machine, usually. I think they'll do exactly the same thing. A lot of Dungeons & Dragons 5e is actually backward compatible for older adventures, whether they be basic, advanced Dungeons & Dragons, version 2. It doesn't, the only one it's not really backward compatible with is 4e. It's the only one that it isn't. Renee, this was cool. Do more like this. I don't want to do too much like this, Renee. I will do other videos about different topics, but probably not about Dungeons & Dragons 6e. Renee, I think we're going to start to see more campaign settings, yes, tied into stories. If you get a campaign setting, there's going to be an adventure as well. That would be a cool way to keep things fresh. I'd love to see Dark Sun. Yeah, I think the problem with Dark Sun is I liked the idea of Dark Sun as a dungeon master. My players, after they'd played, they liked the idea initially, and they just didn't like the idea later on. Or Instrad, since we're getting Magic the Gathering content. Yes, I believe you're absolutely right. Hi, Aaron. Hope you're doing well, Fred. Yeah, hey man, I'm doing all right, Aaron. I just lost my my fiber, and I'm back to VDSL, so I'm back to doing what I had to do in the past. Hi, Harry. How's it going, Harry? I hope in the future a normal goblin has max hit points and an orc has 6 hit points and an orc has 8 hit points. Harry, there's nothing stopping you from changing the number of hit points that goblins have. You can do that now. You don't need to have a new version of the game. You can give them more hit points or less hit points. So it's unnecessary to worry about those sorts of things. You can do that now. Lollyraptor, I don't think this will happen to 5e. They learned from their mistakes. No, what I think will happen is that 5e has developed a life and energy of its own, and it won't be because the design team wants to do it. What they'll find is, and this is what happened with the Long Rest and the Elf Trance and a few other things, where they made changes, not clarifications, not miswordings, but actually changed things because the community said, look, we don't understand what the heck you're talking about, and they made fairly simple and obvious changes. Now, I know this because I've been playing the game since the beta, alpha, and because I was part of the alpha play test, and when it was released back in 2014. Lollyraptor, 5e is about simpler. Yeah, it is simple, but it still can be simpler. Trust me, there are people who have broken down 5e and made it even more simple than it was before. In fact, there are some people who are playing Dungeons and Dragons 5e and they don't even use dice. Okay, I think that's enough. I think I need to leave you there. Please do not get upset with me for doing this content, but I keep talking about what I think is going to happen in the future. And since I couldn't do the combat tutorial, and this was already lined up for a couple of days from now, I thought, well, I'm just going to move it forward. Okay, so tomorrow is likely to be a pre-recorded video which has been edited down, and then the day after that I'm hopefully going to present you with play styles. For those of you who would like to have a little bit of information about how your players play the game and how they enjoy the game and how to manage that, I'm going to talk about play styles probably on, what is it? I think is it Friday? Tuesday, Wednesday? It might be Thursday. Thursday you should see something like that where I start talking about play styles. So as I said, don't get upset about the title, don't freak out. Keep playing Dungeons and Dragons 5e and give it time. As I said, I feel that Dungeons and Dragons 5e is actually going to make the decision to shift and bring in a new version of the game rather than the design team. I don't think that's what's driving it at all. So I don't think that that's what's taking place, or that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, I'm going to get out of here before I lose my voice. You guys have a good night, a good evening, a good morning, good afternoon. Look after yourself, look after everybody around you, and I'll see you next time.